Okay class, today we're going to be talking about some of Nebraska's major river systems as well as some of Nebraska's minor river systems, why they're important to the state. You're going to be asked to locate certain rivers on these maps, and also later we will be discussing the Republican River Nebraska-Kansas lawsuit. Some of Nebraska's major rivers are the Niobrara River, which flows from Wyoming, flows west to east across the state, and eventually runs into the Lewis and Clark Lake and the Republican River in northeast Nebraska. One of the most famous destination spots is Valentine, Nebraska, where tubing down the Niobrara River has become very popular. People put together tubes, throw a cooler, and have a good time out on the water. They also do what's called tanking, and they wind up floating down the river in cattle tanks. Second, we have the North and South Platte River. These two come in from Wyoming and Colorado, and they eventually meet at North Platte, where the North and Platte River eventually just become the Platte River, which runs across the state. The Platte River Valley is one of the most flattest parts in the state, and that's one of the reasons why Nebraska gets the reputation to having such a flat state, because this valley right here is so flat, it's perfect for an interstate. So it's essentially a road itself. So when people are traveling through Nebraska, usually they travel through I-80, and all they see of Nebraska is the flat part, and not up here in northwest Nebraska where we have the sand hills, etc. Also, one of the major rivers is the Republican River, which we will be talking about much more later, because of the Nebraska-Kansas lawsuit regarding the usage of the water. The Republican River flows from Colorado, and Harlan County, Nebraska is the Harlan County Reservoir, which is a lake just 7 miles from the Nebraska-Kansas border, and it eventually flows south into Kansas. Now, you won't be tested on this or quizzed, but just kind of for your information, some of the more notable minor river systems in Nebraska are the Elkhorn River in northeast Nebraska, the Loup River in northern/central Nebraska, which may be a little bit familiar to you if you're in the Lincoln area. The White River all the way out in the northwestern panhandle of Nebraska flows up into South Dakota. And also the Calamus River and the Calamus River Reservoir are very popular during the summer for people looking to fish, hunt, camp, etc. Nebraska has irrigation through water from our river systems, as well as the Ogallala Aquifer, very important to us. Notably, the Republican River, which we'll be talking about a lot more later in the lecture when it comes to the Nebraska and Kansas Republican River lawsuit. The Republican River, just after the Harlan County Dam and Reservoir, is responsible for nearly 90,000 acres of irrigation for south central Nebraska and northern Kansas. Also, all the major river systems in Nebraska, especially the Platte River, provide great habitat and land for all sorts of wildlife. We'll be watching a video here in just a little bit about sandhill cranes, and you'll see how they use the river during their migration south. Also, the rivers are used for recreational purposes. Some of the smaller rivers are more canoeing, paddle boating, kayaking, tubing, etc. Wind boats are common on the Platte River, especially when it's a little bit down because of the droughts. And also the Missouri River is used a lot, or speedboats and really all sorts of boats for transporting goods and services, etc. are all used on the Missouri River because it is so wide. Okay class, next I'm going to show you guys a couple little videos. One of them is of sandhill cranes using the Platte River in Nebraska as a little stopping point on their migration south, and another one is just river systems of Nebraska. And there's no really information on these, but what I want you to do is write down 5 to 10 different just notable points that you see about the video and about Nebraska's diverse ecosystem when it comes to these rivers. Okay guys, the next video that we're going to be watching is a quick 3-ish minute video of somebody kind of going through some of the river systems in Nebraska, and I want you to note some of the more how these rivers bring diversity to the ecosystems of the state, and just write down again roughly 5 or 10 things that you find interesting or that you would like to bring up in the class during our class discussion. Alright guys, now that we've reviewed the 5 major river systems in Nebraska and watched those videos, etc., we're going to do a short 6 question fill in the blank, labeling, being able to identify and label these river systems. Apparently our school is doing a little big construction at the moment. So who would like to come up here and fill in 1 through 6 and be able to identify these 6 river systems in Nebraska? So who would like to come up here and fill in the blanks? Okay, Tommy. Now another little thing you have to do, you have to identify it, write down the name, spell it correctly, and then give me 1 notable fact about that river. Go ahead. You can start with 1. You can start whichever. You can really start whichever one you want to.
Number 1 is the Niobrara River.
Good.
And that river flows into river number 6, which is the Missouri River, which borders the state of Nebraska.
Good. Okay, so you took care of number 1 and 6. Okay.
Numbers 2 and 3 are the North and South Platte rivers.
Okay. Check your spelling on that. Yep, it's good. Okay.
And those two join to flow into the Platte River,
Okay.
which is the one that you talked about with being flat in the interstate and running across the state.
Okay. Number 5 can be a tricky one.
And finally, I know number 5 because I go to Harlan down there,
Okay.
and that is the Republican River, and that is crucial for irrigation for Nebraska and Kansas.
Okay, good. Very good.
What does that teach?
Thank you. Okay, our next discussion is we're going to do a little bit of information on the types of rivers and some of the more common types of rivers that are in Nebraska. One of them is a meandering river. A meandering river system typically contains one channel that winds its way across a floodplain. As it flows, it deposits sediments on the banks that lie on the inside of the curves, and those are called point bar deposits. And they erode the banks on the outside of the curves. As you can see in this picture right here, the erosion happens right here on the outer edge of the curve, and on the inside of the curve, sediment is deposited, which causes it to continually meander throughout. A good example of a meandering stream in Nebraska would be number 5, the Republican River. It meanders its way through, or from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado through south central Nebraska and down into northern Kansas. The second type of stream is a braided stream. A braided stream is a river that is one of a number of channel types and has a channel that consists of a network of small channels separated by small and often temporary islands called braid bars. Braided rivers are one of the most common rivers in Nebraska, even more common than the meandering stream. Most notably, the Platte River, especially when it becomes dry, or when we have a drought. The Platte River is one of the most common braided streams and one of the most recognized braided streams in Nebraska. As you could see in the video that we showed earlier, the sandbar deposits indicates that it is a braided stream, and it looks like it's a bunch of interconnecting streams channel making one big river. Finally, to wrap up our lecture, we are going to be talking about the interdependence between, or as we were talking about in a previous lecture about the interdependence between two nations, today we're going to talk about the interdependence between Kansas and Nebraska and the Nebraska-Kansas lawsuit. This was just settled here recently in 2015. It was a Supreme Court case. It's entitled to 40% of that water in the Republican River. Colorado is entitled to 11%. They get a smaller portion because there are not a lot of the Republican River is actually in Colorado. Nebraska gets 49% of that because the majority of the Republican River is actually in Nebraska. Now, what Kansas claims is Nebraska was too reckless with the water, they overused it, etc. over the past 10 to 15 years, so they sued for $80 million, or they demanded $80 million from Nebraska because of their water shortage and damage to crops. This was settled just here recently. They wound up settling at $5.5 million, which is well off of what Kansas initially demanded. And it is still it's an ongoing thing. it was kind of an ugly Supreme Court case. Both states were very mad at each other. Nebraska said that they weren't overusing it, etc. They were demanding too much. Kansas didn't need that. They claim that Kansas does not need 40% because the river does not flow very much into Kansas, and the by far majority of crops irrigated, those 90,000 acres that the Republican River is responsible for irrigating, is primarily in Nebraska. So as I said, the courts wound up ruling that Kansas gets $5.5 million from Nebraska, which indeed was far off from the original $80 million that they demanded. So conclusion and key topics for the exam, things that you might want to know for the exam. You want to know the major and minor river systems in Nebraska, primarily the major river systems. The minor river systems may be a bonus question on the exam. Know the locations and reasons that they're important to Nebraska. Also, you are to know the types of river systems in Nebraska, being braided or meandering. And finally, I want you to know some of the details of the Nebraska-Kansas lawsuit. So that will conclude today's lecture for the exam. The exam will be next week on Monday, April 20th. So please remember to study your notes over the weekend. I know it's going to be a little bit tough because it's supposed to be pretty nice weather and we all want to go golfing, etc. But please study the notes for the exam on Monday. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to give you a little bit more quiz and some of the details of the Nebraska-Kansas lawsuit that were in your readings assigned for this class. So you should have already had a little bit of a background knowledge of the Nebraska-Kansas lawsuit. So we're going to do a Kahoot over pretty well everything that we've covered in today's lecture. Okay, class, now that we are in our school's new and improved testing center, we are going to do a quiz. Mason.
Sorry, the doctor's appointment this morning.
Okay. Mason, would you please take out your laptop? We're going to do a Kahoot quiz over the lecture from our Nebraska Rivers and the Kansas-Nebraska lawsuit.
I opened the lecture today, yeah.
The Kahoot pin will pop up here in a second.
I'm getting reconnected. Is that normal?
Yep, that's fine.
I'm not going to the website and that should work.
Let's see. Waiting for game pen.
It's loading right now. I'm just going to try to open a new window and do it.
Okay. So the game pen is
Oh, I got it.
901797. And after that, you guys can enter a nickname, and we will proceed to the quiz. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. All right, we can start the quiz now. The questions and answers will be up here. Which major river system is furthest north? Oh, wow.
Oh, we
Good
tied.
job.
My grandparents live up by the Nebraskas, so I'm out here.
Okay, next question. Word meets words and King Kuta are both tied. Okay, next question is, how much money did Nebraska have to pay Kansas for the lawsuit? 80 million, 5.5 million, $0, or 1 million?
Thanks.
Good. Why are river systems important to Nebraska? Good. Out of the 4 possible answers, 3 of them were correct. One of them being irrigation, the other 2 being wildlife habitat and providing a diverse ecosystem. Next question. Which is not a major river system in Nebraska? The Platte, the Republican, the Elkhorn, and the Niobrara. Good. Both got it right. Both got it right. Okay, question 5. Why do many people think Nebraska is such a flat state? Is it because I-80 is located in the Republican... Good job. Alright. Next question. Question 6. What percent of the Republican River is entitled to Nebraska, as far as water usage goes?
Oh,
Good. You both got it right.
grudge match.
Mason, you must have did the reading because you weren't here for the lecture.
Oh, I got notes from him, so.
Let's see here. What city is near where the North and South Platte meet? Good job, you both got it right. It is the North Platte. It is North Platte.
Hastings is a good place.
Hastings is a
What a
good
boy
place.
from there.
What types of river systems or what types of river or rivers are most common in Nebraska? It is both A and B, meandering and braided. Alrighty. Looks like Tom is just barely in the lead by 100 points. Going into 2 more questions. What river borders Nebraska and Iowa? Good, you both got it right. The Missouri.
Hey, let's go 10 for 10 though. Come on, 10 for 10.
Last question is, why did Kansas sue Nebraska? Good, for reckless / overusage of the water from the Republican River. Alrighty, Tom, looks like you won by about 100 points, so you get 1 point extra credit.
Yeah.
That concludes today's lecture. Thank you guys so much for showing up. Mason, you showed up a little bit late, but that's okay. Next week we will have our exam on Monday of the major river systems, as well as the Nebraska-Kansas lawsuit, and there's possible bonus questions about minor river systems in Nebraska. Sweet. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Hey, you want to listen for Froyo in there?